There we go. Now I can see chat.
Let's see the chat. Oh, there you go. Yeah. So no one's a data scientist. Okay. How about anyone working in data domain? Oh, Adam. We sure are. So we have one data scientist. Okay,
I
how
mean,
many people are working in data domain?
someone told me I could call myself a data scientist, but I probably shouldn't.
Okay, it's like our teams now. Yeah, we are data scientists. Yeah, we have 4 data scientists here, including us and John, 5.
I think it's crazy how like titles have morphed over the years because people have been doing this for, like what data scientists do has been doing it for a long
Mhm.
time. It's kind of like analysts. Like whenever you call yourself, people used to call themselves analysts, right? Like in the 90s and even the early
Mhm.
2000s, there was lots of financial analysts or supply chain analysts. And
Mhm.
now people call themselves a data analyst, and it's like we're doing the same thing, except like you're making a forecast or you're keeping track of stuff or you're like just I think it's really funny how the names of titles change and the work really doesn't change that much. We're always moving stuff from point A to point B. We're keeping track and we're trying to predict the future.
There should be a mini course for recruiters on just the titles, the different titles in data domain. Okay,
No
and the
joke.
responsibilities, right? Because I
Yes.
remember, the first job I did was a data analyst, but the work I used to do was, something similar to what data scientist does, right? But that name, that the title, right? They're like, well, you're a data analyst, yeah? You do something else. Like,
Yep.
nope, I do the same stuff as data scientist. And
Yep.
sometimes you get rejection just because you're not a data scientist.
I will never forget an internship I had where at the time I was in college, of course, and I thought I wanted to be a project manager. That just seemed like a really interesting job, just kind of keeping track of lots of money and building something, right? And so I tell this company I'd like to like watch it. I hear you guys have project managers. Can I like shadow one for a day or two? Like, of course. Yeah, why not? Here you go. We'll put you with Frank. And I sat with Frank for like 4.5 hours. So like, let's take a step back. What does a project manager do, right? Like they're keeping track of resources, timelines, milestones. They're communicating with stakeholders about when we're going to execute things, and you raise problems up you run them up the flagpole to get assistance when you need it. That's that's kind of like a 100,000 foot view of a project manager, right? This guy straight up did order fulfillment. He'd get an email and it'd be like, "We need these parts," and then he'd go to the system and he'd type those parts in and he'd hit send and he's like, "That project's done." We did like 6 projects that morning. And I was like, what on
Wow.
earth are we doing here? I'm getting out of here. When that company offered me like a return, they're like, "Hey, we'd like to have you come back as a full time." I'm like, no, no way, no way. I'm not, no. I'm not working here.
Yeah, I have a story, but yeah, I'll tell you some other time. It's a long story. But yeah, it's really funny, right? How sort of the top management people, they have a different perspective on how things get done and how much money they spend. Something that can be done in less than, let's say, $5,000, they spend millions and millions. I'm like, why? Right? If we can hire someone really smart, so I had a friend who was a QA analyst, and then he went into sort of business role, and they had this software, right? That was they were having issue with it. They needed an additional feature, so that they decided basically they're gonna recreate a brand new software just because they need an additional feature.
Hmm.
And then this guy was like, you know what? I'm a QA analyst. I've also worked with software before. Just give me a month. It's not my job, but just give me a month. I'll do something about it. Within a month, he added a feature to the same software. They saved tons and tons of money, right?
Nice.
And like, why create a new tool where, you can modify the same tool,
One of my
less cost.
colleagues. Yeah, you guys have talked to him, Adam, of course.
Mhm.
There's a term he uses that I love. He's like, what's minimal surgery? How can we make the smallest incision, and fix the problem so that we don't have to stitch up, the whole side of your hip here. how can we do minimal surgery and achieve the goal? Like that is so important because, at the end of the day, we're just trying to get value out of this. That especially for most of our work, if it's not academic, we're trying to get to dollars as fast as possible.
Yeah, true. Okay, so let's get started. We'll talk about this more. Hey everyone, thank you for joining. So we are Data to Production. We've been doing this podcast since past few months now, and right now we're on episode 13. And this is a sort of different, slightly different, what do you call, thing than we usually do. When I say, different thing, I mean, something that I specifically don't have knowledge about, right? Because I work as a data scientist, but I never worked with product owners and product managers and so on. So it's something new I'm going to be learning today. And I guess everyone else is here to learn something new, right? So let's welcome our guest for today, John. And so John's a product owner at Toyota. Before that, he worked at many different places. He had many different roles, so he's got a pretty good background. And yeah. Thanks to Adam for sharing his profile. So let's get started on this. Welcome, John.
Hey,
Glad to have you
Vatul,
here.
thanks for having me.
All right, so let me quickly introduce our team before we move on. So myself, I'm Mithil. I'm a data scientist at Decathlon. So we have Ashit and Shashank. Do you guys want to introduce yourself quickly?
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Ashit, and I work as a data scientist at IDFC First Bank. Uh, and I've been working for 2 years for now.
Hey, hello
Thank you,
everyone.
Shashank.
Yeah, hi, hello everyone. I am Sushant. I work as a data scientist in Geo. Like overall, I have 5 years experience, mostly in recommendation and computer vision.
Thank you. Okay, let's get started. So the very first question, right? What does a product owner do?
That's that's a really high level one. It's at the end of the day, right, as a product owner, my job is to make sure that we get done, right? We get a product out that provides value for whoever our customer is. Now, who your customer might be can be wildly different. And when I say customer, for example, my customers are internal. My customer is not like probably anybody on this call. That would be very, very unlikely. My customers are people for this project, at least that I'm running right now, are people inside the company. And so my job is to be that what's called the voice of the customer. So I need to, at all times, I need to understand their perspective, understand where their friction and pain points are. And then frankly, the whole reason we build software is to alleviate friction, alleviate pain points, and make our lives easier, right? And so there's a customer that we're trying to make their life easier so they can focus on something that's, in the business world, I'm always trying to like automate something or predict something or, make something that was very manual and took a lot of time that was not the thinking part. It's the mechanical aspect, right? We want to alleviate that so that they can take a step back and think, okay, here's what the forecast is, right? I don't have to build the forecast. We can just automate some of these things. I can take a step back and think about, I know the news. I know what Wall Street is saying is going to happen in the future. I know what the Feds are saying are going to happen with interest rates. I know what the physical product team has told me is going to change with the vehicles, for example, since I work in automotive, as those vehicles change, the data that represents it, of course, is going to change. So I get to take all of these external things and sort of prioritize and bend them to where we're delivering the most valuable thing in a reasonable amount of time consistently. So, hence sprints.
So where do I mean, I've never heard about this product owner role a few years ago, right? So did it just came into existence now, or was it been there since a long time? It's just different title, right?
It's
And how did it originate, right? Because I see that a lot of companies still don't have product owners, right? I see only a number of companies who hire project managers and product owners, and they work in the data domain, right? Like for instance, my company, we don't have data owners and product owners here, right? So
yeah.
yeah.
So like product ownership's been around for a really long time. Um, I'm gonna stick with my Toyota example. It's really easy to follow, and we all know cars, so it kind of works pretty well. There have been product owners for the vehicle products for decades. I mean, since like the 80s, there's been someone who's in charge of the Tacoma, someone who's in charge of the Camry. They own it. Now, in the car world, they'll actually get a little bit different title. They get chief engineer is their title. But what they're doing is product ownership, where they ultimately they'll have a team of people that are doing different things, right? You got people designing the engines, you got people designing the chassis, every single aspect of the vehicle, and you need to make decision. They're going to present you with, here's what we know, here's these different options. You know the other parts of the car, right? So like there's the seat guy, right? They work on the seats. That's a big deal, right? Like you're sitting, especially on like a road trip car, that needs to be comfy, it needs to hold you up, it needs to be affordable, it needs to last a long time. Right? That engineer on the seat is going to bring a bunch of knowledge and a bunch of context about seats to that chief engineer. And that chief engineer is going to use what they know about the rest of the product and about the customers to make a choice on which seat we're going to go with and what kind of fabrics we're going to go with. So that's a physical world. That's been around for a really long time. I think here recently, there's been a big push in the software and digital space. And I think that's kind of turned into a good thing. Because frankly, I used to build apps as well. I've built apps and I've done some dashboarding and data engineering very lightly. Like I had like 2 years of that, 1 year of that, 1 year of that. And you kind of get lost in what's possible instead of what's really wanted sometimes. You're like, well, I can make it this way, or I can add this feature, I can add this button, I can add. We start adding stuff, right? We want our users to like have all these features and functionality. And this might be a polarizing statement, but I think you'll find a big difference between Apple and Android products in that way. Apple is thinking about like the consumer, like my grandmother. There's a reason my grandmother has an iPhone. There aren't that many settings. I don't want her to have that many settings. She doesn't want that many settings. And I would say that engineers tend to lean a little bit more towards like Android, right? I'm going to ROM this thing out. I'm going to overclock my phone. I did all that stuff. So it's fun to tweak, and we think everybody else wants to tweak. The product owners kind of bring this kind of mindset of nobody wants to tweak, right? When you go to the Google land page, there's no buttons all around. There's a search bar, and that's it, because that's all anybody wants from Google. And so product owners are really supposed to bring that really true, that voice of that customer. And I think that since companies have started seeing software, especially as a means to interact with customers directly, like social media websites and games and like VR platforms, we don't want options in virtual reality. Tell me what to do. I've never done this before, right? There's a lot of consumers are kind of coming to computers for the first time, coming to thinking of data for the first time. They don't know what they want. Show them what they want. Henry Ford said this a long time ago. If you would have asked people what they want, they would have said a faster horse. So like part of it is kind of really knowing what that customer really actually wants. Like they don't really want a faster horse. They want to travel, and they want to travel with ease. And so it's sort of my job to kind of really keep them in mind whenever we're building whatever it is we're building. So that's kind of a little bit of a random John's assessment on the product owner history.
So it's more like a user or a consumer centric role, right?
100%.
Focusing more on what consumers want than just providing them something random. Like so, if data scientists are working on some problem, let's say, right? You want to make sure, as a product owner, you want to make sure that data scientist is providing a solution that aligns with a user, or what a user is looking for instance, right?
I would say that
So
that plus prioritizing which feature. So like we want to make everything, but what's really going to help the customer right now?
Right. Yeah, I should get that question.
yeah, so who are your customers, and what kind of products have you worked on?
Yeah, so I've worked on as a title of a product owner, I've actually never worked on one project. As an application developer, I was the sole developer for an app on 3 different applications where I was also the product owner. Like I talked to the customer and I figured out, we did all the requirements gathering, scoped out who their personas were going to be, what kind of features and functionality that they needed to have. I didn't have the title product owner then, but I was doing the activity. I imagine there's a lot of people who are going to watch this who are actually probably also doing that same thing. You probably already are a bit of a product owner. If you're talking to your customers and if you are really, trying to understand what makes them tick and what are their frictions are, and you're trying to remove those bits of friction, you're doing some product ownership right there already. So today, the customers for my product are people we call district managers. And basically what they do is they work with the dealerships. So, Toyota makes cars, the dealerships sell them. So there's got to be someone in between to sort of facilitate, like, what cars are you going to get and what kinds of accessories are they going to have? And so I work with those people who literally they drive to these dealers like every week. They drive out to each one of these dealerships and they're like, "Hey Frank, how's it going? What do you think of the new Crown? What are customers saying about that paint color? What are customers saying about how this thing drives?" And it's a two-way street. We tell them, these district managers tell them what kind of products are coming out, kind of marketing things are coming out. And then they also take the feedback from the dealers so we can take it back to headquarters and say, "Hey, this car needs some help like this. Hey, this marketing message really isn't clicking like we expected it." So yeah, the district manager, that's a long path to a small pond. The district managers are my customers.
So that's an interesting question, right? So I was just thinking about it, So in my company, for instance, right, we don't have product owners or product managers specific, dedicated to a data team, I would say, right? So,
Mhm.
I directly, as a data scientist, I directly talk to, the end users. By end users, I mean, let's say I'm building something, dashboard or something for stores, right?
Mhm.
So I'm talking directly to the store, the store leader as to, okay, what do customers think about these products? These products are going to be releasing next month and so on and so forth, right? So when there's a product owner as part of a data team,
Mhm.
does that stop data scientists from communicating directly to, let's say, stakeholder, or, do they have to communicate via you?
That's a really good question. So typically I try to do most of it.
Mhm.
Frankly, from a time perspective, right? I've got developers and analysts heads down, like cranking through things, and that takes hours. And the amount of meetings that you have to have in order to talk to all these
Mhm.
stakeholders is really broad because, like, for example, the product that I'm making is nationwide. So I'm talking to people in 4 different time zones. Just
Mhm.
getting the developers to have the time to talk in all 4 of those time zones and have these 1 hour, I mean, it kind of drains. But what we do like to do, and we haven't done this in a little while, admittedly, so my team can probably call me out on this. But one of the things I really like to do is we'll do, if you're familiar with Agile, there's sprints, right? And there's ceremonies inside these sprints. One of those ceremonies is called sprint review, and it's where we actually look over a sprint review or a sprint demo, and it's where we cover what we did last month or last sprint,
Mhm.
however long it might be, 1 week, 2 weeks, a month. Everybody does something a little different. For us, it's 2 weeks. So we look at, hey, here's all the features we added over the last 2 weeks. Here's some of the challenges we overcame. And we bring a customer to that meeting and sort of show them, hey, we added this, we added this. Do you have any questions for us? And that way, the customer and the developers, everyone's all on the same call. And so kind of back and forth, the customers can say, "Oh, I love that. The functionality is great. I don't understand this part though. Please make this a little more clear for me." And so the developers, they're like, and they, if they're like, "Well, what do you mean? What's not clear about it?" Right? So sometimes I'll
Mhm.
have like one of my data scientists or data engineers kind of come back and be like, "I'm sorry, this seems clear to me. So let's figure this out. How is this part not
Mhm.
clear?" And they'll have an explanation of what's not making sense. And so while I try to take kind of the brunt of it, and frankly that's a large portion of my job is being in meetings because I'm taking information from the developers, taking information from the platform team, taking information from the customers, and trying to get the information to the right people at the right time. Because one of the other things is you can't just overload people, right? You can't be like, "Here's the whole project."
Mhm.
You really have to be like, "Here's what I need now."
Mhm.
Because frankly, how many projects never leave a notebook? I think McKinsey's done some research of like something like 90% of projects like never leave a notebook. Um, that's one of the other things that a product owner is going to be really focused on is the get this out of science experiment and into being used by someone and making an impact. Uh,
Mhm.
so that's kind of one of the other kind of perspectives that we're so focused on getting it to where there's frankly, in my case, another team owning it. I'm gonna hand it off to a management team once it gets built.
Right. And so something that you mentioned, agile, right?
Mhm.
So when I first got into this domain, data domain, right? Agile was something, it's a word that I heard a lot, right? And every now and then I do interviews, I've been asked, do you follow agile process,
Mhm.
right? And I'm like, what is the agile process, right? And a lot of beginners in data science, they don't know what it is, right? And even now, like some companies, they don't really follow agile process, they follow like waterfall, let's say,
Yep.
process, right?
Yep.
So would you mind defining, what is an agile process and how like important it is to have that in a team, right?
Yeah.
And what value it brings, right, to the entire flow, right? Starting from designing a product to all the way releasing a product, and then developers being in the middle where they're working on the product, and going back and forth between different team members and the product owners and so
Yeah.
on.
It Agile, I think Agile works really well. Now, Agile, it's kind of like a lot of things. They get almost pushed to being like religious, and it's like you must do this, and it must be 2 weeks, and you must have this. Blah blah. Blah. It's like, okay, what's the spirit here? So so for me, there's gonna be people talking about Scrum and talking about very specific things. To me, it's more of the spirit of Agile, and what that means is working iteratively. And so to iterate means you must complete. That's the part where I think some people think of iterations as like idea one, idea two, no. Deliver one, deliver two, deliver three. That's where I think a lot of teams mess up what agile is. Do not clean the data and do not solve the problem on the first pass. On the first pass, you should figure out what kind of data do we even have available to us? What problem do we think our customers have? We don't really know, right? Until you've removed that friction, you don't really know if that was actually the friction. And so I like, there's actually a book I would recommend for a lot of people called the Lean Startup. And what's his name? Eric Ries. He writes about like iterating on building a company, right? And a product in that sense. So, and this works in software, it works everywhere. The whole point of it, right, is to have a hypothesis, build something that allows you to test that hypothesis, and then validate that. And then once you get an answer, you either, continue, pivot, or stop. So if you're getting good signals, keep adding more of what you think is working. Your hypothesis was right, so just kind of keep going that way. If you're like, okay, this is still a problem and people are still willing to pay to have it go away, but our solution's not right. Let's pivot, right? Let's try a completely different kind of approach. And then sometimes you'll be like, actually, this isn't a problem. It is a problem people have, but they're not willing to pay for it. And if they're not willing to pay for it, you shouldn't build it. And so getting to the point where you have built something and you can charge people for it, and if no one buys it, then that should be an incredibly huge signal for you, right? That this might not be the best option. So doing that within data, right? Why is that important for these projects? Frankly, the same reasons. You think you know you have the right data. You think you know the friction that the customer has, and you think that the way that you're going to construct your solution will make it go away. And you're going to think that until you've put it in their hands. So the whole point of sprints is to deliver incremental value. It's not you do not solve in a sprint, you do not solve the whole problem. You find a thing that I can make better or make go away or whatever. And that's what we're going to deliver in the next 2 weeks. And then after you get that out, if you don't get glowing reviews, you need to take a step back and think about it. If you do get glowing reviews, what's the next functionality that makes sense? And this is where product owner comes into play. I need to be teeing up the backlog of features and functionality and problems that need to be solved and having that ready so that the rest of my team can pull from that backlog and be like, oh, this is the next thing. This is the next thing. And so hopefully the development team doesn't need to think too much. I want them to think about the customers, but that way they don't have to, if they want to, frankly, take a seat back and just
Mhm.
solve the very specific problem as I've scoped up in this Jira ticket, they can, and they will deliver value this week, and we'll get to show it to a customer next week, and we'll learn, we'll do it again and again and again. It really is like a really powerful way to test and learn.
And having that customer constraint, removed from the whole process, developers have more time to do coding, right?
Yes.
Like I remember a friend of mine who's a senior software engineer, and so he showed me his calendar filled with meetings with stakeholders, customers, and everyone, right? And in a week, he would barely get 3 to 4 hours of coding. Because,
Yep.
once you become a senior, even if you don't have people who can directly deal with customers and stakeholders, this is how it is, right?
Yep.
So, yeah,
It's so true. And
you
like,
think,
especially like staff and principal level, like staff and principal, I mean, you're really like not coding anymore. You are, frankly, at that
yeah,
point, you should be identifying high impact, highly visible work and making sure that it gets to your team. Like that's, once you're like staff, like that's where you should be like, that's a problem we can solve. Executives are looking at it and I have the right team to make it go away. That's my, and you find a way to rope your hands around it. And this is where politics come in. It's a it's a natural byproduct of organizing people. Like it's just there, right? People, I want to win, you want to win, we're on the same team, but there's only $100,000 to go around for projects. So we get 50K, 50K. Well, I need 75K to really solve the problem. Oh my God, it just starts the whole, politics is kind of a natural byproduct of organizing people, but yeah, it works. It does work.
Yeah, I just want to tell people's story. If you don't follow agile process, and if you don't have a right planning in place, this is what happens. Okay, so I had a friend. So during my grad school, one of my friends used to work for a startup, um, and the startup was brand new. They didn't have any developers. They only they knew what is a product that they want to build,
Yeah.
but they didn't know how to go about, right? So what they ended up doing is they didn't even have a data, right? So what they ended up doing is they hired a bunch of data scientists. They didn't even hire data engineers. They don't even have a data. So all these data scientists that come in there, they've been sitting around, just getting paid for doing nothing for three to
Yep.
4 months.
Which is miserable. It
So
sounds fun. It's miserable.
exactly. And even if you imagine, let's say $50,000 is what they pay, per data scientist. If you have 5 data scientists, that's a lot of money, right? And the funding that you get, initial funding, half of your money is probably gone, just wasting around, right? So having, a good plan at the start and following an agile process, like it's very valuable. That's the first thing that was taught to me at my company. Because I came from academia. In academia, the way that you work is just work on a problem. You don't leave it until you solve the entire problem, right?
Yep.
But in the company industry, no, build an MVP product, release it, make small iterations, put things into production, continue, repeat the process. So yeah, thanks for sharing.
Yeah, of course.
Very valuable, very valuable to not just data
And
scientists but to everyone, right?
and one thing I would note about like people being agile, let's be really honest. I I have not worked at any companies that are like fully agile. Like that's super rare. It's
Yeah.
kind of you get a mixture of like this waterfall agileness. And you kind of need that, right? Because the accountants, the bean counters, they have to plan the next 3 quarters. They have to. They have to tell especially a publicly traded company, you have to tell your stakeholders what the heck's going on. And so there is this balance of like, okay, here's how much money you can get, and here's how long you're going to get it for. So like you better whatever you solve in that amount of time and that amount of money, either we'll use it and hopefully it works well and hopefully make money, or if not, frankly, the project dies. There was a project I was working on at my last company. Um, I mean, they put a lot of money into this product and they put about 3 or 4 years into it. They killed it. It's gone. We're talking like multi-million-dollar operation, dozens of teams, onshore, offshore, 2 product owners, a TPO. I mean, they've been working on this for years and it's gone. They couldn't get to a point where they delivered value. And frankly, it's because they approached it too waterfall-y, too project-y. They didn't actually know what their customers want. They thought they knew what they wanted. They thought they knew what their customers wanted. They built that. They spent a lot of money and time building that vision, and then they rolled it out, and everyone's like, you know, how expensive is
I,
this? I don't know. I'm not paying that much for it.
I think that's a lot of startup guys.
Yep,
And that's how
yep.
the startup, they have a really nice idea, just that execution part, they don't have to do it.
And that's why I think bootstrapped companies are, some of the biggest winners because they have had to deliver. They don't get, there is no funding. So their funding is their customers. Yeah, my money's always on bootstraps companies. I think they're statistically, I think their odds of winning are just higher.
Mm. So Adam, you said that you worked, so in your whole career, you worked in one group that executed Agile flawlessly. Would you mind sharing about it?
Yeah, I worked in a group when I was in an autonomous vehicle group, and they followed Agile to the T. Again, part of why they could do that is it was more researchy in a way, right? Like a lot of things we were doing were exploratory, but it was an amazing experience. I kind of feel like if you're not going all in, it's kind of useless. It almost adds more overhead if you're not gonna go all the way in. Sometimes it adds more overhead because you have all these meetings and
Mhm.
you're not necessarily getting like what is the point of the meeting? Like John said, it's about the spirit of the meeting, right? Not the meeting itself. So
Totally agree.
That's the thing. How do you even convince people? That like having building a team from scratch, and hiring people who follow this process, right? A lot of people, they don't follow this process, right? But at the end of the day, you have to build a team, right? And then once you start building a team, let's say you have members, and some of them team members, right? Some of them follow as a process, whereas some don't, right? How do you even go about training people, and how do you convince them to actually follow the process, right?
So
That's a difficult thing I find, right?
training's easy. Watch the YouTube videos and start doing it. Like literally, like there's all kinds of good training on safe. That's the easy part. The part that's hard with training is people like to make things people like to go over the top. Everyone's life, it appears to me as if everyone wants everything to be black and white. It's either on and off. And we need to start thinking of this world as being quantum. We are not binary, we are quantum, and there are a whole spectrum of places you can be. Now, there's more likely places to be and less likely places to be, but you can technically be anywhere. Yeah, so training is easy to get the foundation, the words, the ceremonies, the timelines. That's easy. The mindset is a different thing, but even that I think is the easy part. The hard part is that Agile cannot, never will be a ground up effort. You cannot grassroots Agile.
Mhm.
So what you have to do is you have to sell an executive or a director who will sponsor this
Mhm.
and test this and get this going. And then, like anything, the proof is in the pudding. You have to deliver
Mhm.
something. So if you can convince an executive, listen, you've been hearing everyone talk about Agile. You've heard Facebook, Bang, Amazon, everyone's talking about Agile. Are you curious in it? And then this is where, if you really want to like put your product owner hat on, build a business case. If we do this way for this long and deliver these kinds of things using this methodology, we will make this much money or save this much time or whatever value metric number. What do you think, executive? Give me a small team or hire a small team, wherever you might be in your career, and be like, here's how I want to structure it. Here's the problem I want to solve. I think we can deliver value in a month, because if you're really doing Agile, you will. I think we can deliver value in a month, and I think we can have a product out in 3. Test it with me on one small team, and then get that executive, bought in on it. You're gonna have to sell, frankly. Get them sold on the idea of trying out Agile. You're basically be agile with Agile. Test it out, find out what your customers learn, find out your customers, in this case being the executives, that you need to buy into this whole agile methodology, sell the executives on testing it, deliver value, show them that this is scalable, and then, yeah, from there it's, you have to push and sell up to the executives. Agile can't be great. You can't, you can't do this ground up. An executive is going to have to protect and shelter you, because all the bean counters are going to be like, how much money are you going to deliver on this day? Like everything's waterfall. They've always done waterfall. All the projects are waterfall. The financing is waterfall. And that's how we've built everything ever, is through projects and Gantt charts. I mean, like, literally Gantt charts was part of my degree when I was starting engineering management. We had a whole class on Gantt charts. So breaking that mindset, you're fighting 100 years of how we plan. And how are you successful? You have a solid plan. This kind of breaks that whole mold of, let's not have a solid plan, let's have a solid approach. Agile is that solid approach. So yeah, it's a bit of selling to an executive. Not gonna lie, that is an uphill battle, because you'll probably be fighting against the current.
Does that help as well with the product market fit? Does that play any role in that?
Oh,
in that process
definitely.
as well?
Definitely, because each time when you deliver value, like, so like, think of it, you're every 2 weeks you're looping through, and when you get to the top, when you're at that top of that circle and you've ended a sprint, you should have a new feature, whether that's the button changed. I mean, it could be as simple as the button changed colors. Okay, do some A/B tests. Do people click the buttons faster? Are they going through your website? Are they actually clicking it whereas they weren't? Start testing. You need to know what your impacts are. But if you're constantly delivering that value, you're going to find that product market fit, because your customers will tell you with their dollars what they do and do not like. So let people vote with their dollars.
I think Shushan had a question. Shushan, you can go ahead and ask.
Yeah. So basically, when in the starting we are discussing about the mainframe, the limitations which you told about. So how it influenced the approach of data analytics and like decision making when we are using that mainframe, because the storage of data is quite different in the mainframe, and there are a lot of limitations, real time data and all. So how that impact the work of data scientist or data analyst here?
So as a data scientist, I don't think it'll change too much. If you're not building like a streaming system, typically you're getting data in and you're, like I said, forecasting something, predicting something, categorizing something, clustering. We're doing data science and getting an output. So frankly, the data still comes in columns and rows, right? It's very much like the OG tabular data is mainframes. And so that's on the data science side, I don't think it changes too much. The data engineering side, it becomes a massive headache. All of the new frameworks you've been learning, all of the streaming tools, plugging things into Spark, no, just no. Your mainframe does not, it does not connect to it. Because nobody's working on, nobody's adding on to mainframes. Everyone is getting out of them. And same with, like, even in some instances, like some old Oracle databases. Oracle makes a great product. I'm not taking a dump on Oracle. I love what they make, but they're pretty pricey. And a lot of people have found that there are some limitations on what you can do, and they can have some more flexible solutions using other tools. And so you got a lot of people coming out of those systems. So it's kind of like any other system. They all have their limitations, right? Pandas can't hold that much data. So you might have to find a new way, a new tool. I'll throw out one my data scientists will love. You could look at, like, using polars. Let's actually talk about this for a second. So, like, if you haven't heard about polars, it's a new package that allows people to work on data frames that are much larger, faster. Sounds great. Awesome, right? Like why wouldn't you use polars all the time? I'll give you an example on why you wouldn't use polars, even though technically, like, on a checklist, it has every box that Pandas has plus some more. So why wouldn't you? In enterprise, there's a reason. It's called security and compliance. If you want to go to production, you have to go through their screening. And their screening is pretty much like this. We have a list of things that we've approved. If you're not on that list, it is a 6-month to 2-year lead time before we will approve some sort of new technology because there's a huge backlog of other crap that people have been asking for the last decade. So like, while you might be able to bring out like, oh yeah, let's just use polars. I read about it in some Medium blog. Let's use that. As a data engineer, you might want to take a step back and like, hey, am I allowed to use that here? Right? Because like, for example, I wasn't allowed to use Python 3 in one of my old jobs. They just hadn't approved it yet. They were still using 2.7. Everything you did had to run on 2.7. It just 3 was not approved yet. You were not going to production. I don't care what you can make $200 million a year. Don't care. Like really, truly, security team has a full veto right. Don't care. Stop. So whenever you're working with some of these systems like mainframes, old legacy Oracle databases, you got to be really cognizant of what can plug in directly to one another. And so like, but there's workarounds. Workaround on mainframes is FTP servers. I mean, yeah, it's from the 90s. And it's, not exactly fast and there's no logging. Honestly, there's a whole lot of things you don't get, but I can get data from point A to point B. We can run it through a model and put it back in point A. At the end of the day, we're going to make a lot of money doing that. And so that's what we're going to do. There's a lot of scrappiness, I guess is what I'm trying to say when it comes to working with legacy systems.
Yeah, got that.
Yeah, do you guys, anyone in the audience have any questions? We'll pause for that. Ashit, if you have any question.
Yeah, so we were going to talk about the importance of communication and like how does
Yes.
it differ downstream and upstream?
Yes. I'm so glad you brought this up because this is something I think is like super critical. And I would say that this is like one of the skill sets, like if you're interested in like product ownership as like a career at all, without this, it's gonna be tough. Because frankly, as a product owner, I have to talk to everybody. And when I say everybody, I mean, I talk directly to, really, really technically smart people. Like I talked with my lead data scientists, my lead data engineers directly, lead DevOps, lead CI/CD people, and I don't need to know exactly what buttons they're clicking, but I need to conceptually understand how these building blocks plug into one another and some of the major pitfalls that you might fall in when you do so, and trade-offs. So I need to be able to have these like not super deep conversations, but I need to be able to really understand what I'm buying, if you will, whenever I'm presented with different options. I also need to talk to my leadership, like direct, like what I would call like senior management, right? They have the budgets. Like if I need, for example, I needed to do something to the mainframe, I needed some money to pay the mainframe people to like make a change. That's going to go through my senior management. So I need to convince them of why this is the only way to do this. Talk about other alternatives that we've tried out, and then ultimately get them to buy in on it. And then I also need to talk directly to like senior executives because I need them to, for a bunch of different reasons. Sometimes I'm just sharing what we're doing. A lot of times though, I'm trying to get their organization's buy-in. Like there's this whole 1,000 group people, and I need them to start using our tool in order for the company to make money. Well, I'm going to need that executive's buy-in. So why am I talking about these like different layers? The level of communication and the detail that I'm going to have with the vice president versus my lead developer are completely different. Like there are words I use with these people that like I would never use with these folks and vice versa. And actually, I've got an example. Let me pull that up really quick. Because I think this paints a good picture on how to like communicate at these different levels. And so this is like this communication wheel that kind of shows you these different like feelings and allows you to either speak with more specificity or less specificity. And as I talk to like my lead developers, I'll be out here on the edge and I will talk more about highly specific, very specific things. Like I'm not going to say do AI to get me a prediction, or like I'm not going to say do AI to make a cluster or group things together. with my lead data scientist, I'm going to say, hey, I really think we can use a k-means clustering algorithm because we have these different feature sets, and we have a pretty good idea of what we want to make. So I think that's probably a way we want to go. Whenever I
So then
talk
if you could
to,
make it a big, sorry to interrupt you, if you could make that as a
yeah,
big screen, so they can see the
I'll
words.
just send it on the chat.
Mhm.
is that a little
Yeah.
better?
Thank you.
Awesome. So yeah, so like, let's look at one of the examples really quick. We've got like bad in the center in green. Well, you could get bad, or you might just be bored. And you might not be bored. More specifically, you might be indifferent, right? And so like, I would probably use the word like indifferent with like a lead developer because I'm trying to be very specific. I want them to we need to communicate in very fine grain levels of what's going to happen to this data and what kinds of trade-offs between these different models, or if we're going to throw in some sort of heuristic that's just going to assume something. We need to be very specific about those assumptions. As we move further up the chain and you go towards just bad, right? This is where like I'm talking to an executive and I'm going to be very general. I'm going to say stuff like, all right, we're going to have this raw data coming in. We're going to use an AI model on it. And on the output, we're going to be able to get these groups of markets. Really like keep it high low because frankly, they don't know. A lot of these folks didn't study data science. Like for example, if you're, a marketing executive, you probably know some analytics. There's a lot of analytics in marketing, but it wouldn't be unlikely for you to not know like specific models or the differences between like different engines, right? Or platforms or infrastructure. I don't say we're using S3 buckets with a Lambda function and we're blah. I say it's in the cloud, right? Keep it simple as you're talking to different levels of people. And so this is one of the things that as a product owner, I'm constantly bouncing between the center of the circle and the exterior of the circle, depending on who I'm talking to, because frankly, people have just different levels of familiarity with the topic.
Has anyone ever heard about a book called Storytelling with Data and Storytelling with You?
Yes.
You did.
I
So
think I've
I
got it
started
right
reading
here.
that book many
Oh, I
times, but
don't.
never ever got to finishing it.
This one.
Yeah, yeah. So I was
Yeah.
watching the podcast with by the author. I was really intrigued by her story, right? Of how she became an expert in storytelling. Something that
It,
no one actually thought a role exists, but how she became an expert at Google storytelling, right?
I cannot tell you how important that is in what I'm doing. Not so much for, it's sometimes for the developers, like when I'm talking directly to engineers and scientists, there's a little bit of a story. It helps the context, right? All right, guys, follow me on a journey. So our customers are district managers. Let's talk about a district manager's day, right? And let's go through some of their pains and let's talk about some of their interactions with the current systems. And that kind of story kind of helps people understand and get grounded in what's going on. But then I also need to be able to tell stories of like what could be, right? This is where I get to kind of put my Disney hat on and be like, how should the world be? The world should be more like this. It should be more automated. There should be better forecasts. And so we try to tell this story about, hey, hey, executive that I'm trying to get funding from. Imagine a world like this and really sell them on this whole story. And yeah, I think Cole Knaflic, she does a fantastic job of showing how people can do that with pictures and colors. Because frankly, like I know some people talk about like the 4 different learning styles. That is some made up stuff in my opinion. We all learn visually. I don't care what you say. I could say 1,000 words at you, but if I draw a box going to another box going to a cloud server, I don't have to say anything. It's pretty obvious that data move here, go there. Like, so, and one of the things that she talks a lot about in her book is removing noise. That's the hardest part of telling a story. We want to ramble. And when I say ramble, we don't want to ramble. I want you to know everything I know. That's not possible though. What I should do instead is, what idea do I want to get into your head? And if I keep that as my focus, what one 2, max 3 things do I want you to take away from this 30-minute presentation? If I can focus on those 3 things, I'm going to be way more effective because all the other words I'm saying, frankly, are noise. And they're creating all this extra static and all these other different paths you could go down. But if I had a very clear, hey, I want you to become a data scientist because we need more of them because the world needs to predict more things. And if we can just stay really clear on that one thing and say it from 4 or 5 different angles, it's going to stick a lot better. That's really difficult, is to remove noise. And Cole Knaflic, I think, does a really good job with that with colors, because a lot of people want to like vomit out some like rainbow chart and like something like what I've got on the screen right here. But frankly, if I would have prepared for this a lot better, I would have used that example. I would have made everything gray except for bad. Bad would have been blue or green or something. And I actually only would have highlighted bad, then bored, then indifferent to make it very clear. I want you to follow me, right? The whole point is not to like, hey, know everything I know. Here's a point. Here's something I want you to be interested in. If I can make you interested in it, I don't need to teach it to you. You'll teach yourself.
Thanks for sharing.
Of course.
Especially this diagram, right? The words are powerful, right? And what words you use while talking to the different types of people are really valuable. And seeing that, this is the first time I've seen this kind of like picture of just putting together words and how do you which words do you use while communicating with what kind of people, right?
Yeah, first time I saw this, I was like, I was blown. I was like, I need this. Like, this is perfect. Especially like when I'm like really happy, and it's like, but I'm not just happy. I'm feeling very, thankful, right? So it's not just it's no, very specifically. Here's exactly how I feel. And if you can kind of be fine-tooth, fine grain with your communications when necessary and broad when necessary, like you said, words matter, and you don't want the words to stick in people's heads. You want the idea to be present. And yeah, sometimes I won't be accurate because it's more important that it impacts you emotionally rather than it be factually correct. Especially when I'm talking to like executives and managers. I need to be factually correct when I'm talking to developers and analysts because we're working with numbers and they need to equal things. But a lot of times, you don't want the details to get in the way of a good story, I guess, is like, as one of my managers says. It is actually much more important, depending on who the audience is, that the emotion gets across. You've changed their mind and that you make them care about something that they previously didn't care as much about.
Right. So since you have to communicate with a lot of different teams, right? You have to communicate with data engineers, stakeholders, data scientists. Assume you gotta have that knowledge of what everyone is doing and what's possible within the limitations for each team, right? A data engineer's limitation, data scientist limitations, versus what is it that business is expecting from that, right? And what is possible, what's not possible, basically. So how do you actually gain this knowledge, and how do you keep up to date, as a product owner? I guess developers have to keep up to date with everyday tools and new technology that's coming up. I see that the same thing applies to data owners. So how do you go about doing this?
Definitely. So part of it is, it's like any other kind of thing. Try to read, try to stay abreast with industry stuff. I'm not gonna lie, I'm not subscribed to some like big thick magazine that I'm thumbing through every Saturday. But I am pretty regularly, like, if I hear of something, for example, I'm big on LinkedIn as far as like the social medias that I use. It's the one that I tend to get a lot of my like information. If I see a topic come up 3 or 4 times, it's time to do a Google search. You know what I mean? Take an hour, go figure it out. What are we even talking about? Get a foundation, and then I'll probably take that topic back to my team. Like, hey, I heard about data mesh. Can we do that? What does that even pertain to us? And because frankly, my understanding is often rudimentary, and I need to approach all those conversations fully knowing that, right? That I am not the expert in this by any means. I am a jack of all trades sort of by design. And so I need to know like, where's the value? How is this better than the other setups in the past? It's
Mhm.
really knowing about like, I don't need to know what buttons to push. I'm not so concerned about like, how do I set up my YAML file so that it'll, frankly, the DevOps engineer that works for me, that's frankly his main concern. What I'm concerned about is what's possible and what additional value am I going to get in going from what I was doing to this new thing everyone's talking about, and what are the hurdles in going from A to B? That's another really big one that I think kind of gets overlooked sometimes. It's like, oh, this thing's so much better in all these different ways. Let's go do it.
Mhm.
And it's like, but in what ways is it not better? Because it's pretty rare that something is just wholesale better in every way. It happens, but that's not common, right? So yeah, it's
Yeah, like
really reading.
like people like jumping on exciting things, but not really
Yes.
understanding whether do you really need to? Can you you know can you get away without jumping onto exciting thing, right?
Yep.
Can you bring value to the business without actually doing anything complicated, right? So
And I would say, going back to Agile, actually, in Agile, there's
uh,
a concept called a spike. A spike is when you go learn, you're gonna go learn something. If you have a good team and you don't, and you have a product owner and product management that's able to keep the executives from just being unreasonable, you should be able to bake in a certain amount of learning into each sprint, or at least like every other sprint, or some sort of cadence that allows for a certain amount of spikes. Just go try things out, right? Like,
mhm,
hey, Tableau has some new functionality that allows write back. Oh, that's pretty dang cool. Can we do that here though? Like, can we do that here at, in my example, can we do that at Toyota? Has that passed
mhm,
security? Has that passed all the platform people? Are we even on that version? And so we might set up a little like 1 or 2 point spike on some sprint to go, let's go try to build that. Is that functionality that we can consider adding into our product? So hopefully if you're really doing agile in the true spirit, which is iterate, learn, test, develop, and put it in your customers' hands, part of that is learning and testing. And so you should be baking in, trying out some of these new technologies, because frankly, it's fun. Like, let's be honest, like, yes, I know people work in data and tech for the money, but I like to think most people are here because it's fun. I have fun with this job. Like, I have a blast yeah, I'm tired. Last week was a lot. Next week's actually going to be a lot too. But like in general, I love what I do. And I think most other people do too. And it's because they're always trying fun new things. So that's another thing you kind of have to balance when you're leading teams is, you know, got to deliver value, got to keep people engaged too. And so I try to find that balance of let's have people deliver a boatload of value every single sprint. Let's also make sure we learn something new every once in a while.
mhm. And then what's the distinction then between a product owner and a product? What's the other word for it? So usually there's a product data scientist, but there is in between person, right? Who'll be working, let's say, in a product team, uh, mostly focusing on products. Right? So you have this product owners, then underneath that you have this people who are solely working on the products, the design and the use cases and checking out the product market fit and just keeping up with the deadline and so on and so forth. Right.
Hmm.
So and then product managers. So you have these product managers who are handling the deadlines and so on, right? So what is the distinction between these different roles and
Honestly,
where
it's
do they
really
fit
tough.
in?
It's gonna be
Mhm,
it's gonna be company by company specific, like, and it's gonna vary widely. If you want like my opinion on like what makes a good setup, I think a good setup
mhm,
is you've got for each team, there's a scrum master. A scrum master literally they do all the ceremonies. They're running daily stand-ups, they're doing sprint retros, they're doing backlog grooming, they're doing sprint planning, they're doing frankly the day-to-day planning. The product owner may have just one or more scrum masters because there might be one or more teams. And that product owner is
mhm,
making product decisions, no technical. They're making just pure, they're aware of technical. You don't want to be nonsensical, right? But
mhm,
they're really mostly focused on we need this kind of capability in our system. We need these kinds of features in our systems. And so they're going to be thinking about features and capabilities. And then a product manager, normally in my head at least, they're across a couple different products. And it, hopefully if they're set up correctly, like a family of products, if that makes sense. So you might have an example would probably be like these different products that are spanning different demand supply chain type capabilities, right? So there's the demand side of a supply chain and there's the supply side of the supply chain. And so like this product manager might have a couple different products that measure demand for different types of services or products that the company might offer. And so it's kind of like in my head, they're kind of a hierarchy of Scrum Masters often reporting to a product owner, often reporting to a product manager. Now, the product manager role is one of those like super optional ones. Sometimes you see them, sometimes you don't. It really kind of just depends on like how many things does the company consider to be a product versus a project. Honestly, that's where I think one of the more interesting distinctions is. You'll see a lot of project and product owners kind of that title get flip-flopped, and they really should be very distinct. A project has an end date. You will be done by the end of the year. You have $2 million and you have 10 people build the building. Products have a life. And so they grow, they get, there's the whole hype cycle, right? You grow, you get excitement, you bring on customers, you ride that customer for as long as you're able to provide value to their life. And then eventually something changes and the product ends and you depreciate it. But that's not like some set that, I'm not over here saying in 2028, we're going to turn my product off. No. We're going to turn the product off once it stops adding value. Until then, it needs ownership. That's one of the things that I think a lot of people, like, especially like when I was young, I did not know that distinction. I didn't really understand that distinction until honestly a couple of years ago. I thought they were like totally interchangeable. They're not. And companies treat them interchangeably because, I'm not trying to dog on HR, but HR doesn't know how technology's built typically. And they're the ones who do a lot of team structuring, or they at least have a large say in how these teams are going to get structured. And so, if they don't understand software development and, product development, it can be that can be another uphill battle.
Yeah, I think it's something that took me a really long time to understand it myself. The distinction between that, and especially once you start working in a company where you don't have product managers and product owners, then it's clear, the distinction is more clear, right? What does a project manager does, what does a product owner do, and so on and so forth, right? So I think we are out of time. So last thing, would you like to share something to people who want to get into product owner roles, or how can they think about having that product mindset? So someone like me who works on, let's say, product data, how can I have that mindset?
So I'll talk about the mindset, and then I'll talk about like how you can probably help yourself kind of knowing more about those kinds of career paths and what these folks are doing. So like that mindset, honestly, it's pretty simple. Amazon says this best: customer obsession. Like you are the like you need to empathy. So like as far as like skill sets, developing, understanding how someone feels and the efforts that they go through, the frictions that rub them raw, and being able to identify those and then identify a way to remove that friction. That's the mindset. Everyone hates pain. And if you can alleviate pain, you are taking care of your customer. So it's really like not, there's customer obsession plus balance. Do not let my customer obsession prevent me from delivering something, right? Like I with that customer obsession mindset, I'm gonna hopefully get to a point where I'm like, I really think this is gonna like solve their problem, but it's gonna take a long time to make. So iterate, right? What can you do now to alleviate that, right? Band-aids, then stitches, then surgery. So, the crawl, walk, run, fund, however you want to think of this. Get started, obsess about that customer, think about what their pain points are, and then continually scrape away at that pain until you've got it nice and polished and they don't have that pain anymore. And then in that case, go find the next problem they've got. So as far as like career stuff, one thing I did want to talk about is you've probably heard of product owners and you've probably heard of technical product owners. I'm not a technical product owner. I am kind of like technical. Like I like to think of myself as like lightly technical. Like I can, I sling plenty of SQL. I know a little bit of Python. I could build some Alteryx flows and some dashboards pretty easily. But that's actually arguably an optional thing for a product owner. Because I'm obsessed about capabilities and features. A technical product owner, so I would be voice of the customer. A technical product owner is going to be the voice of development. They're constantly thinking about infrastructure. They're thinking about security. They're thinking about, existing systems and data. They're thinking about, runtimes, different packages. So those are some two big differences. Now they work together. I have a peer who's a TPO, and we work directly. I'm always thinking about the customers. He's always talking about and thinking about the platform team and the what's possible with the kind of code we're trying to write. So there's a distinction there. They're both really cool roles. You really have a seat at the table, if you will, as far as steering the boat on which way we're going to go with the product. So that's one thing. The other thing that I would want people to know is while all the classes you're going to see online are going to teach you how to become a FAANG product owner, most product owners don't work at FAANG. Most product owners work at banks and car companies and Frito-Lay and Fossil Company and RSM Consult. Like we're all over, right? So most product owners are not making Facebook. Most product owners are making stuff like what I'm making. And some people would say it's more boring. I honestly, as long as I have a really fun team and we're solving problems, I'm having a really good, I enjoy it. And also another thing that's kind of interesting is like product ownership, whenever you're the PO for like some Facebook thing, the expectations and standards are a little different. And what, you're always working on like what a customer is going to see. I'm just working on like what some sort of system is going to see, or another analyst is going to look at my products. So the things I make may not be flashy and whatever, but I work on products that deliver like hundreds of millions of dollars in value every year. So trade-offs. One other thing I would probably just to drop a little tidbit. Me and one of my colleagues are actually working on something right now. We call it BitBros.
I'm about to share that.
Yeah, so we're starting bitbrosdata.com. It's our first thing we're working on is actually a book that is centered around careers for data-centric folk. So whether you're an analyst, data scientist, or product owner, if you're working with and around data, hopefully we're putting together some really cool examples. We're working on some checklists. We're gonna have stories. We're a pretty good long way into writing it right now. We've had a lot of fun, and I'm really looking forward to kind of getting this out. Actually, Mitul, I'm hoping to, and Sushant, also, I'd like for you guys to kind of get one of the pre-reads whenever we're ready, get some feedback for us so we can make sure that this really is like really valuable to everybody. So yeah, and last but not least, and you'll read this in the book a lot too, you gotta network. You have got to make sure people know your work. You could literally invent calculus again and not make a dime. Like if nobody knows what you're working on, it's, some of the biggest impacts, on man's, throughout all of mankind's existence happened to people that, they never got benefit in their entire lifetime. It took an entire generation later for people to understand. And so that's kind of why, going back to communication, you need to be able to communicate your ideas clearly so that you can get buy-in, so people can understand what you're trying to say, which often means dumbing it down. So keep it simple, keep it a value level conversation. When the higher up the chain you go, the more you talk about dollars, the more you talk about the customer, the more people frankly are going to listen. As much as we might find algorithms and machine learning really cool and exciting, for most other people, it is magic and it is neat and they like to see the output, but they do not want to learn how to do magic. And so if you can kind of approach a lot of conversations with the layman's with that kind of mindset, I think you're gonna have a way bigger impact. Frankly, in everything.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing. And thank
Yeah.
you for teaching us about product owner. In addition to that, the agile processes and whatnot. It was an interesting session, and I'm sure everyone took away some valuable things from this podcast. I mean, I did, so I hope everyone else did as well. And yeah, thank you for sharing the website for the book. So yeah, feel free to check it out, guys. I had it open actually. I was like, yeah, I'll share it with
Thanks.
you. So we had Adam a few weeks ago. We did 2 sessions with us. So him and John, they both are writing it together. So yeah, feel free to check it out. You will definitely find info about career. How do you navigate? If you're working in data domain, how do you go about your career and so on and so forth. I'm looking forward to reading it for sure.
It's been a lot of fun. I'm so glad you guys invited me out here. It's been a lot of fun to kind of share my perspective and kind of hear a little bit of yours as well. I'd also just throw out, if anybody's got any questions about product ownership or anything like that, feel free to reach out. I'm pretty easy to get a hold of. And I really like just kind of sharing random product and data stuff with people. It's a lot of fun. A lot of people have helped me along the way, so I want to make sure I can do the same.
Yeah, for sure. We'll put the recording on YouTube, just like we have been doing in the past. So here's the session with Adam.
Awesome.
So yeah, feel free to check it out. In addition to that, we'll put the links of LinkedIn, so you guys can go check it out. Other than that, we also provide some mentorship. So we talked about Agile a lot, right? And it's something that's missing from the beginners in data science. They don't really follow the Agile process like we talked about today, and they don't really have that software development mindset as well, right? So we decided a lot of boot camps, they just teach you the foundation. They don't really teach you how to think about anything that you build in terms of products, in terms of softwares that needs to be long lasting, right? So this is something that we are offering. So we are offering, how do you go about building an end-to-end architecture? Let's say a whole system, if you like. And in the process,
awesome.
how do you, right? And in the process, how do you go about, following the Agile approach, your planning and analysis, design, and so on and so forth. And, coding is another, I think coding plays a really important role as a developer. So how do you go about coding? How can you be a better programmer, right? I mean, anyone can be a coder, but it's all about, how can you be a better programmer? How can you think in terms of, let's say a software engineer would, right? Like thinking about bugs, how to catch bugs, how do you, build products in a way that things don't break.
Exactly.
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 Right? And how do you, go about from, thinking about bugs and, thinking about not breaking things in production, right?
And that's what I was gonna say. I'm like, it's one side to like think about like preventing bugs, but also thinking about if you really want this to make it, if you want your thing to drive $100 million decision, it needs to run in Docker in the cloud somewhere. Like that's how the whole world works. So if you can from the beginning, or at least some way midway, kind of like, make some notebooks, proof of concept, right? Iterate, learn. And the second you're like, I've got, this is the way. This is a way we can solve this problem. Start making it to where you can deploy it, right? Create that main script, create the README. Let's get ready to rock and roll, right? You're making real software. Like this is the exciting part. You're making real production software. Like that's where we make money. That's where your career takes off. Let's say it's in academia even. That's where your research paper gets reviewed because it runs. You have a dashboard that government agencies can use and play with and interact with and learn from, but it has to be able to get to production.
Exactly, right? And that's what the boot camps don't teach, right? The boot camps will teach you the foundation, but they don't really teach you about, okay, what's next? How do you put this into production, or how do you, release it to end users, right? Or anything that you build, any data science project that you're doing, if it's not reaching out to the end users, it's a waste, right? What's the purpose of it? Why did you spend months and months to building something that no one's going to use, right?
And I
Um,
think part of the
Mhm.
reason why is some people, there's a saying out there, it's really popular, I know in America, and I would imagine there's a reasonable translation that's probably gone around the world, and that is that a jack of all trade is a master of none. That's a really common phrase that was said, like, while I was growing up, and people still say it to
Mhm.
this day. That's not the whole saying. The whole saying is a jack of all trade is a master of none, but more often better than a master of one. Being able to understand the whole system and being able to better understand how these things connect,
Exactly.
you can really make a big impact. So I know a lot of people want to be like, I stay in my lane. I'm a data scientist. I write code. I make models. And it's like, yes, and that should be your primary focus if that's your title. But if you can learn a little bit of CI/CD, if you can learn a little bit of software
Exactly.
engineering, your stuff's going to get into production faster, and then you get to the next model faster. Because otherwise, you're just dorking around waiting for someone to refactor your code, whereas you could have written it, production ready from the get, or at least closer to, and get on to the next project. That's why we're doing this, right? I want to solve problems.
Exactly. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that, right? CI/CD, very valuable, especially when it
Yep.
comes to automation, right? You don't want things to, you don't want to run things manually every single day or every week.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Try and save as much as your time and the time of, others for whom you're building the tools for, right? And that's about it. So yeah, feel free to check it out. That's on our website. And yeah, check out the book that John has shared the link with. And yeah, thank you very much, John. Like once
This has
again,
been a
we had a
blast.
pleasure having you. And yeah, we'll look forward to probably more sessions in the future.
It'll be fun. I'm looking forward to it.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Yeah.
Thanks, John.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay, so